This is week 164, and the Fourth Orthodox Easter celebrated since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Anna Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories from Ukraine this week. This first segment may be upsetting, and there's not really a way around that. For all residents of Ukraine, the threat of aerial strikes from Russia is omnipresent. There's hardly been a single day of the full-scale invasion where Russia hasn't killed Ukrainian civilians somewhere in the country. Some places see much higher rates of attacks. Eastern and southeastern cities closer to the Russian border bear the worst of it on pretty much a daily basis, facing glide bombs and artillery in addition to drones and missiles. Here in Kyiv, we get drone attacks multiple times a week on average, but missile strikes less frequently, although central and western industrial cities are targeted by ballistic and cruise missiles more often. Strikes on far western parts of the country, closer to the European Union, are more rare, but certainly not unheard of. I'm giving this background to explain that nowhere in Ukraine is ever really safe. Whether you're in Kharkiv to the east or Lviv to the west, an aerial strike can be just minutes away at any time. And Russia has shown, time and time again, that it's willing to target civilian infrastructure without discernment. And there are certain days that serve as especially painful collective reminders of this fact. The April 2022 strike on the Kramatorsk train station that killed 63 civilians. The October 2023 strike on Hroza that killed 10% of the village's pre-war population. The July 2024 attack on Kyiv, where a ballistic missile hit Ukraine's largest pediatric cancer hospital. Or the strike on Lviv several months later that killed 4 members of the same family in their own home. It breaks my heart to add last weekend's Palm Sunday missile strike on Sumy to this list, although it's far from the only deadly mass strike on Ukrainian civilians since Russia declined the full ceasefire offered to it almost a month ago. Palm Sunday is one of the largest religious holidays of the year in Ukraine, a country where 2/3 of the population is Orthodox Christian. Last Sunday morning, as crowds of Ukrainians were on their way to or from church, Russia launched a ballistic missile at downtown Sumy, a city in northeastern Ukraine. Minutes after the first explosions, as rescuers and residents rushed to the site to help those who came under attack, Russia deployed a second strike on the city using a ballistic missile armed with cluster munitions, a direct violation of international law when deployed against civilians. 35 people were killed, including 2 children, and nearly 120 more were injured, including 15 children. Like the other mass attacks that I mentioned previously, this was a targeted strike clearly intended to kill as many civilians as possible. This, along with the April 4th strike on Kryvyi Rih that killed 21 people, including 9 children, is a grim demonstration of US President Donald Trump's failure to pressure Russia to agree to a full ceasefire by Easter. His special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who notoriously keeps spouting false Kremlin propaganda about the people of Ukraine's occupied territories, had met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in St. Petersburg just 2 days before this strike. Whatever their conversation consisted of, it doesn't seem to have slowed down Russia's genocidal campaign. One Sumy resident even told the Kyiv Independent that the attacks have only intensified in the months since Trump has taken office, leaving many more afraid for their safety than they were a year ago. And what was Trump's reaction to this particular strike, you might ask? He called it a mistake, without elaborating further. I wonder if by those metrics, he also considers 9/11 a mistake by the otherwise well-meaning Al-Qaeda. We're now months past his administration's promise to broker a peace deal within 24 hours, and slogging talks have yielded wildly inconsistent messaging about the US's stance on Russia's invasion and the path to ending it. Trump's team waffles between condemning Russian aggression and downplaying the severity of it. The only concrete result of the talks has been the partial ceasefire on energy infrastructure that began on March 25th, which Ukraine's foreign ministry says has been broken by Russia more than 30 times in the weeks since. No one we've spoken to in Ukraine, from the streets to the high cabinets, feels that we're any closer to lasting peace than we were before Trump's second term began. While the US may be failing to meet even the bare minimum of what it swore to achieve instantly and effortlessly, the Ukrainian military has been taking retaliatory action to defend the country. On both Wednesday and Thursday, strikes by Ukrainian drones were reported in Sumy, a Russian town about 700 kilometers from the border. Sumy is home to Russia's 112th Missile Brigade, which along with the 448th Missile Brigade in Kursk Oblast, were the culprits behind the Palm Sunday attack. It's all but a foregone conclusion that Russian strikes will continue, and hopefully it's becoming more clear to the world that the only way to stop Russia is to stand up to it, rather than flatter it. The biggest story of last week was the capture of 2 Chinese prisoners of war in Ukraine's Donetsk Oblast, with President Volodymyr Zelensky saying on April 11th that several hundred other Chinese nationals are suspected to be fighting in the Russian military. Although Beijing denied any knowledge of its citizens fighting for Russia, and the 2 POWs claimed to have been individually recruited by Russia rather than deployed by their own government, their capture raises questions about China's role, both tacit and explicit, in supporting Russia's war. A new development in the debate emerged on Thursday when President Zelensky said that Ukraine's security service had uncovered evidence of China directly supplying Russia with gunpowder and artillery. This confirms long-standing reports of China directly sending weapons to aid Russia in its invasion, something that Beijing explicitly said it wouldn't do as of last summer. On Friday, Beijing again denied the allegations, calling them groundless. Further details of what Ukraine's security service discovered about these transactions are expected to be announced in the coming week. And if confirmed, China's direct involvement in the war will have far-reaching implications for international diplomacy. On the subject of direct involvement, this week also saw reports that North Korea has risen to powerhouse status when it comes to supplying Russia with artillery shells. A joint investigation by Reuters and the Open Source Center, published on Tuesday, found that between 75% and 100% of artillery shells used by various Russian units originated in North Korea. Since August of 2023, satellite tracking of cargo ships traveling between the two countries indicates that upwards of 5.8 million rounds of ammunition have already been delivered to Russia. Pyongyang has reportedly already turned a $20 billion profit from selling weapons to Russia, while also reportedly receiving oil products and rocket technology. But we also can't forget that North Korea is the only country confirmed to have directly entered the war on Russia's side, with a reported 12,000 North Korean troops deployed to Russia in 2024. Ukraine estimates that between 5,000 and 6,000 of those soldiers have already been killed or wounded, although their activity thus far has only been noted in Russia's Kursk Oblast. A spokesperson for Ukraine's military intelligence said on Tuesday that it's possible that we'll see North Korean troops fighting on Ukrainian soil in the foreseeable future, as Russia's spring offensive gets underway, and the now more experienced North Korean troops may be deployed in the expected ground assaults into Ukraine's northeastern Sumy and Kyiv oblasts. As well as the financial and material gains that Pyongyang is receiving for its contributions to Russia's war, we should also bear in mind that the deployment of North Korean troops serves as a steep learning curve for the North Korean military, one that might result in high casualties in the immediate sense, but will strengthen its practical understanding and experience of modern warfare in the long term. These troops aren't just reinforcing their Russian counterparts. They're gaining experience and knowledge of drone warfare and other modern combat techniques that the surviving troops will take home, which can then be put into practice elsewhere as Pyongyang dictates. For South Korea, wider Asia, and the Western world as a whole, this definitely shouldn't be taken lightly. At the Kyiv Independent, reader contributions are our main source of revenue. Shows like Ukraine This Week are only made possible by viewers like you. If you'd like to get more involved in the Kyiv Independent community, we have several membership tiers that give you access to our Discord community, exclusive content, discounts on our merch, like this new design that I'm wearing now. We have an active group of readers who have built a relationship with our newsroom and with each other, and we'd love to have you along. There will be a link to our membership page in the description below. I'd also like to thank everyone who donates directly via YouTube. Your support is greatly appreciated. There's finally been progress, although it's far from finalized, on the much-debated minerals deal between Ukraine and the US, with both announcing on Thursday that they've signed a memorandum that the minerals deal in its current form is understood and acceptable to both sides, and will tentatively be signed next week. The details of this iteration of the deal were negotiated by Ukrainian and American representatives in Washington on April 11th and 12th, and the memorandum was published amid talks between Ukrainian, American, and European diplomats in Paris on Thursday. France's foreign minister expressed hesitant optimism after the talks, saying that they signaled a willingness to include Europe in the crucial talks on Ukraine that thus far they've been iced out of by the US. The deal will also reportedly respect Ukraine's path to EU membership, with no items conflicting with Ukraine's efforts to join the Union. If the minerals deal is indeed signed next week, it'll then be ratified by Ukraine and America's parliamentary bodies, after which the door will be open for the US to make various investments into Ukraine's future. American Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that the deal will serve as an important signal to Russia to halt its invasion, and will factor heavily into peace negotiations. This deal has been debated for a long time and has fallen in and out of the news amid other developments in the war and other controversies surrounding peace talks. The salient point is that Thursday's memorandum, although in no way the final word on the matter, is the thing that President Zelensky traveled to the US to sign prior to the infamous "have you even said thank you once" clash in the Oval Office. If we do get a minerals deal next week, it'll mean that we'll have crossed a 2-month delayed item off the list on the long road to negotiating peace. Also on Thursday, State Department spokesperson Tammy Bruce said that America had presented Ukraine and Europe with a plan that outlines a durable and lasting peace, which Secretary of State Marco Rubio also reportedly shared with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, via a telephone call. There's no further information about what the plan contains, and given the Trump administration's concerning remarks about Ukraine's occupied territories, including Special Envoy Witkoff's continued habit of repeating Kremlin propaganda that these parts of Ukraine want to join Russia, it's unclear what new element could pressure either Ukraine or Russia to concede things that they've thus far been unwilling to budge on. It's become increasingly obvious with the refusal of the full ceasefire and the violation of the partial one that Russia doesn't want to end its war anytime soon, and the US hasn't been successful at convincing them to do so. As such, Ukraine will undoubtedly remain skeptical of any plan that doesn't apply huge pressure on Russia in some way. On Friday morning, Secretary of State Marco Rubio made the somewhat confusing declaration that if no progress is made in peace negotiations in the near future, the US might abandon the effort altogether, given President Trump's other unspecified priorities. Whether such statements are a tactic to pressure one or both sides, or are Trump's actual plan B, remains to be seen. I can assure Secretary Rubio that no one wants to see progress more than Ukraine, and no one seems as resistant to it as Russia. For our member question this week, we have this from Malcolm. A temporary 30-day ceasefire was announced on March 11th, which Russia appears to have completely disregarded. We're now past the 30-day point, Thursday, April 10th. Whether or not there was an actual ceasefire, is there an official position as to whether it is officially still in effect? Or is Ukraine now able to lift its self-imposed restrictions on attacking energy infrastructure in Russia and targets in the Black Sea? I'm going to ask my colleague Natalia to give me a hand in answering this.
Thank you, Anna. There is actually a bit of a discord on when the dates of this so-called ceasefire are starting, because Russia announced its start on March 18, and Ukraine has announced that it counts ceasefire a week later, from March 25th, after the talks with the US delegation in Saudi Arabia. And so it's still technically in effect on the Ukrainian side. And in a briefing on April 16, Ukraine's foreign ministry said that it will decide closer to this date whether it will continue to abide by the terms that it agreed to. For now, we can see that Ukrainian signature deep strikes into Russian territory on water refineries, fuel depots, and other facilities like that has stopped. although Russian government accuses Ukraine of breaching the ceasefire, largely without evidence. And Ukrainian government says that it has also recorded at least 30 violations of ceasefire from the Russian side since March 25th, and I was able to review the list of those violations sent by the Foreign Minister.
Yeah, thank you for clearing that up. I know it can be confusing for people, so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Not only does your contribution go directly towards supporting our journalism, but you also get a whole host of membership benefits. If you'd like to join us, there's a link to our membership page in the description below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week.